This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on expectations from Union Budget. The participants are A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Shishir Sinha, journalist.
Mr. Bhattacharya, this budget is the second year in succession when we will have a shadow of pandemic. At the same time, the challenge is how to accelerate the growth. What should be the key message from this budget?
The broad message from this budget should be how to make the recovery in the economy that we saw in 2021 could be made sustainable in the coming years, and at the same time, the growth remains inclusive in the sense that while we achieve higher growth, that benefits of that growth percolate down to all sections of people without attracting the charge that the recovery is K-shaped or more in favor of some sections of society. Because COVID has created dangers of an accelerated pace of inequality, which this budget must address by making sure that growth remains inclusive and growth becomes sustainable.
There is a big debate over balance between fiscal consolidation and growth. In your opinion, which one is more critical, fiscal consolidation or growth?
I think in the current context, fiscal consolidation is probably as important as growth. Actually, the trade-off that many people see between fiscal consolidation and growth is an illusion. In my view, fiscal consolidation is also a recipe for ensuring higher economic growth. Why I would like the budget to pay more attention to fiscal consolidation in the current context is because we are going through a phase, not just nationally, but also globally, where inflation is rearing its ugly head. If inflationary expectations in the economy have grown roots, therefore it is important for fiscal consolidation to be used as a tool to control inflation and ensure that the benefits of growth are not frittered away by runaway inflation rate.
Normally, when we talk about fiscal consolidation, one of the key things which comes in our mind is the compression. So, should we say fiscal consolidation means just only compression, or does it have other meanings also?
Fiscal consolidation should not just be seen in terms of pure quantitative reduction in the size of the government's expenditure in relation to its non-debt revenues. I think what we should see fiscal consolidation is not only should we control government's expenditure without being backed by non-debt revenues, but also by the quality of fiscal consolidation, because without qualitatively superior fiscal consolidation, we will be failing in our primary task of ensuring that expenditure streams that are needed to attend to the COVID-induced woes to large sections of the economy are not addressed. So therefore, I would say that while a fiscal consolidation glide path is an important instrument to say that if the current year's fiscal deficit is 6.8% of gross domestic product, next year, if it is to be at 6% of gross domestic product, but along with that 6.8% to 6% of fiscal deficit reduction glide path, we should also make sure that in a reduced deficit scenario, how expenditure priorities are such that you get what is called more bang for the buck, to make sure that the sections that need the support to sustain economic growth in the future, the segments of the economy like the MSMEs and the informal sector, which have taken a disproportionately higher hit in the COVID situation, their concerns are addressed through more considered increase in the expenditure allocation for them, because that expenditure hopefully will revive demand in the economy, which right now is an area of concern apart from inflation. So therefore, fiscal consolidation must not just be about expenditure compression, but also about the quality of fiscal consolidation, which enhances sustainability of growth and helping revive demand in the economy so that growth becomes sustainable.
Now coming to the expenditure part, last year we saw a heavy increase in capital expenditure almost by 34% to 5 lakh crore plus. Somehow the overall expenditure in terms of capital has not been according to the expectation as of now. From now onwards, especially during the next fiscal, do we see same kind of trend, same kind of allocation under the capital one? Or will we see some kind of reduction or some kind of rationalization, I would use the word, for capital expenditure?
Capital expenditure increase in 2021-22 budget was a welcome feature of the government's annual budgetary exercise that was also marked by many bold reforms, announcements like privatization, national infrastructure pipeline. Now, what we have seen during the current year, and as you mentioned, that the pace of capital expenditure has somewhat slowed down, and in spite of an ambitious capital expenditure increase, what we see is that in the first 9 months, the capital expenditure has not been as much as it should have been. So therefore, it is important for the government to do some introspection, how it improves its ability to spend more money as long as that money has been allocated. And the second important factor to be kept in mind is at a time when the private sector is not investing because their capacity utilization is not very, very high. It is around 70-74%. Now, in that kind of a situation, the government has the primary responsibility of increasing investments. So, therefore, capital expenditure must continue to be a priority area in terms of whether it is going through the national infrastructure pipeline or whether it is going through investments in the railways and the roads and the ports and the airports. But in general, capital expenditure should remain an article of faith for the budget for next year.
If we talk about taxation side, especially the personal income taxation, there's a very high expectation there will be some kind of change so that the people should have more money in the hand. Do you think that the government has room available to make changes in the personal income tax?
Budget making has to be more inclusive. We have seen in the last few years where the exemption slabs have been raised and the minimum income tax rates start kicking at a relatively higher levels of income. A time has come where we don't need to tinker with income tax rates any further. On the contrary, we should try to do away with the exemptions. And if only when we do away with the exemptions, we should think in terms of reducing the tax rates. The government a year and a half ago had introduced a very, very welcome scheme under which the personal income taxpayers could opt for a lower tax rate with no exemptions. That was the right path, and hopefully the budget will take and pursue that path and deepen that path and widen that path so that the individual income taxpayers have a greater incentive to opt for lower tax rates with reduced or no exemptions so that effective tax rate remains where it was while making the tax system more simple and more transparent and not linked to a taxpayer's ability to spend money, but linked to the taxpayer's need to pay the money. Right now, what is happening is that if you are in the higher income bracket, your ability to save more and use those exemption routes are more. So therefore, the tax system is not necessarily loaded in favor of the lower income earners, but loaded in favor of the higher income earners. So a time has come to use that scheme and widen its application so that there are fewer exemptions and the overall tax rates are lower.
But there is a common perception because of exemptions, more and more people put money in various saving instruments. So if you are taking away the exemption, then it will have an impact on saving and investment rate. Do you agree with this kind of notion?
I entirely see why this concern comes because for many, many years, the many tax saving instruments were created and they were riding heavily on these incentive schemes in the taxation policy. I think a time has come where people should be encouraged to save for the sake of saving instead for the sake of getting some tax exemptions. And this is, to my mind, tax policy which makes it simple, transparent, and not against those who don't have that much ability to save. So therefore, tax policy should follow that path and not rely and not be influenced by investment institutions. So I think a time has come where we need to move on and make the taxation policy more simple, transparent, and with fewer exemptions and lower rates.
At this moment, one of the big issue is the state poll or assembly polls in 5 states, including Uttar Pradesh. So do you see that the budget will have more political influenced one or more with the economic reality?
It is very natural to expect the budget, which is also political and economic statement, it is also a political economic statement, not to ignore what is happening on the electoral front. The country's largest state in terms of the Lok Sabha seats, UP, is going to polls. So it will be foolish on anyone's part to believe that the budget that will be presented on 1st February will be unmindful of the electoral considerations that will come before the budget makers. So I will not be surprised if the budget announcements that are made are geared towards softening the blow of COVID, softening the blow of the economic adversities arising out of the pandemic on the people, which will also benefit people outside the states that are going to polls, but also people who live in those states and who are going to cast their votes. So I think the budget will have that influence of the elections, and we cannot just say that the budget will be presented without keeping those elections not in mind. As a matter of fact, the Chief Election Commissioner, for some good reasons, made this announcement suo motu that the budget should not be influenced or should be inhibited by the election code, because budget means the policy for the whole country, not just for a few states.
And we should also remember that it's a constitutional obligation, and also the Chief Election Commissioner at one time was involved in the budget making exercise. So he knows the importance of entire budget exercise. One final question is about the farm sector. We have seen that during last 2 to 3 years, this sector has given extraordinary result in terms of contribution in GVA, in terms of the growth rate. At the same time, we have seen some kind of rollback. One particular thing I'm talking about is 3 farm laws. So considering all those things, what you expect, especially for the farm sector in this budget?
The government will be conscious that under pressure from the agitating farmers, it had to roll back these farm sector laws. And there's also a pressure on the government to make minimum support prices a statutory right. So therefore, the government, I think, will be using the budget to announce some additional schemes for the farming community to reverse the direction of deteriorating terms of trade that is seen in the last 2 years, by making sure that some of the taxes, some of the minimum support prices that are announced are enforced through better procurement. I also expect that the government, through the budget, will probably enhance the Prime Minister's Pradhan Mantri Kisan scheme, where the annual allocation is 6,000 rupees per landholding family. That may see an increase. Plus, of course, the subsidies for fertilizers and, of course, the procurement prices, they will continue to be supportive. But I think the most important thing that I expect this budget to do for the agriculture sector is an increase in investment in the Indian agriculture, which has been lacking for some time. It is important to create necessary assets in the agriculture sector so that the efficiency and productivity of Indian agriculture improves, so that it can stand on its own and compete with the rest of the sectors.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on expectations from Union Budget. The participants were A.K. Bhattacharya, economic analyst, and Shishir Sinha, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.